All right. Check, 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 check. Hmm. Okay. Hello, everyone. All right. Last class before the Thanksgiving weekend. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about all of you. Today I want to finish off our discussion of the chapter on new directions in epistemology. Um, and that means we'll be discussing feminist epistemology. Let me just get the slides going here. All right, so let's see. Get myself out of the way here. One of the things I was thinking about in planning today's lecture was that I would like, if possible, for it to be a bit more discussion based. Um, yes, we do have a quiz next week. Yeah, that's still happening. Um, I'll say a bit about that towards the end of today's class. Um, as I was saying, I would like for this lecture to be a little bit more discussion based in the sense that I'd like to see a little more participation from everyone. Not to say that you haven't been participating, but I would like to get some engagement going in the chat um, or via video or voice if you're willing to speak up. Um, Excuse me. Why would I like to do this? One of the main themes of this part of the chapter is that for a good part of human history, men have arguably held a privileged position in philosophy, in science, and in probably most other areas of life. But of course, we're a pretty diverse bunch here in this class. So I want to hear from everyone when it comes to discussing feminist epistemology. One important thing that I think that Crumley surprisingly doesn't really mention is a definition of feminism. And the definition of feminism that I'm going to work with here is that really, when you get right down to it, feminism is about equality of the genders. I would say genders here instead of sexes because there's also um, been a sort of decoupling of gender from sex in philosophy, in the social sciences. We now understand these to mean two different things. Sex refers to, I guess, what we would call biological characteristics, and gender refers to the sort of subjective experience of being a man or a woman or perhaps even of having no gender or some combination of genders, right? So there's a sort of decoupling from biology there, which is important, I think, to be aware of. So when I talk about men, women in this lecture, I'm talking about gender. Um, so that's an important distinction and an important thing to understand when we get going. Feminism is about promoting equality of the genders. And feminism is not a monolithic philosophy, right? I mean, there are, as we'll see today, in fact, there are quite a lot of feminist epistemologists who have different takes on just what we ought to do with traditional epistemology. Some are a little more radical in terms of the extent of their adoption of social constructivism. Um, Feminism should not be taken as a monolithic movement. Indeed, there are different waves of feminism that have happened throughout history. So maybe it would be worthwhile going over some of those now if you're all interested. Let me know if you are in the chat. see who's interested. Well, I mean, first of all, I should probably ask, like, how familiar are we with feminism? So a lot of you would like to hear about it. Some of you are very familiar with it, quite a bit. Okay, that's good. Some of you may be a little familiar, kind of. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. Yeah. So for those who don't know, feminism has come in waves, right? Um, I suppose for our purposes, one of the important one of the important waves of feminism was due to Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote a piece called "Vindication of the Rights of Women." And in that, she argued that women are just as smart, just as capable as men, and women should have equal rights, rights that are equal to men. Um, now, Shelley, or not Shelley, Shelley was her daughter. Mary Wollstonecraft was, at her time, a bit of a forward thinker. But of course, looking back, we can see that some of her views might have been a little problematic. She argued for equality of the sexes, sure, but she also thought that Europeans were, shall we say, better than people of other ethnicities, right? So, and of course, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I'm not picking on her, by the way. This was true of probably every philosopher at the time, right? Yeah, a kind of ethnocentrism, right? But this is not to pick on Wollstonecraft. I mean, this was certainly true of probably everyone in Europe, or at least a lot of them, unfortunately. But that's one wave of feminism, right? Where we have a sort of like a call to you know equality in terms of rights before the law, rights to education, things like this. Yeah. Well, well, yeah, let's expand this. Um, yeah, well, some I wouldn't say extreme, maybe. It depends. Um, yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is equity. Yeah, okay. So if I get what you're saying, it would be that men and women may have different healthcare needs, right? Um, Obviously, everyone should have equal access to that care, but the care is going to be different, I suppose, right? Like as a man, I don't really need to worry about access to abortion, for example, but that would be a concern for women. Um, so I think that's what you're saying, if I interpret you correctly there. Um, but there have been subsequent waves of feminism. A big one was in the early 20th century when it came to women's suffrage, for example, the right to vote. Women fought for the right to vote in Great Britain, in Europe. Um, yeah, actually, Bronwyn, that's a really good point. Most of it was done on men, and most of it was done by men as well, and that's had a huge impact on women's healthcare. So yeah, you're right. That's a good point. So women's suffrage is another important turning point. In the 1960s and 70s, reproductive rights were a big one. So that's when we had the birth control pill. Um, I forget when. No, it was in the 70s, but in the United States, they had Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court case, um, which unfortunately has fallen now. kind of a setback for women's a big setback for reproductive rights for women. Um, in Canada, we have R versus Morgentaler. That's our sort of version of that. That enshrines or at least legally protects access to abortion. So there's just rights before the law, the right to vote, legal rights, rights to access to certain kinds of healthcare, right? So there have been sort of like waves over time, different of different sorts of pushes for equality and or equity between the genders. Um, Well, I would say rights and responsibilities. Of course, rights kind of imply responsibilities, right? Like if I have the right to freedom of expression, then I have the responsibility not to use that for like hate speech or something, right? Um, so that's my little preamble about feminism. So, um, back to epistemology. Let me just get myself out of the way here. So, um, traditional epistemology, as we've seen, is very Cartesian. And Descartes, sitting there meditating, doing his meditations, has us imagine this rational, dispassionate knower. But a lot of feminist philosophers think that this picture is just incorrect because it misrepresents science as science is actually practiced. And moreover, it might actually be a mistaken and harmful idea. And we'll try to unpack some of the ways it might be mistaken and harmful in this lecture. But two important themes in today's lecture are each related to a critique about how science is actually done, how people actually do science. So one target of the feminist critique, the feminist epistemological critique, is our conventional understanding of reason and objectivity, and another is the privileged place that reason and objectivity have in our conceptions of science. So, um, again, while we're not talking about monolithic views here, one concern that feminist philosophers and particularly for our purposes, feminist epistemologists share is a concern about androcentrism. So androcentrism is seeing things from a male point of view, a male-centric point of view, while ignoring other perspectives, mainly women, but also one of the things that's really part of the zeitgeist right now is the discussion of, for example, trans people. So, I'm talking trans men and women, people who are perhaps non-binary. Their perspective has also been quite marginalized too. Um, so this is androcentrism. This is the worry, right? That in terms of science, in terms of our conventional understanding of reason and objectivity and the role that those play in the sciences is androcentric. Another important idea is that the way we produce knowledge is that we do it socially. The nature of knowledge itself might also be social rather than completely objective. Why don't we try and unpack this a little bit? I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think we can see the concerns, right? I mean, the concerns over androcentrism seem to be quite obvious, right? Like if you're a feminist philosopher, one of the things that you're going to be concerned about is the patriarchy, of course. So, what is the patriarchy? I'm sure that we've heard that term before, but can anyone explain what it is? And you can use the chat, or you can raise your hand or speak up with voice or with video. Hopefully somebody volunteers. Yeah, male dominance in the government and other places of power is good. A structure where men are the head or the, yeah, society primarily rules and conducted by men. Yeah, 10. Yes. Um, that was a great movie, by the way. Yeah, if you haven't seen the Barbie movie, you probably should. Um, very good. A very good film. Um, Now, yeah, you're right. The patriarchy is where men are at the head of those power structures, right? Society is organized around men. Men kind of determine or dictate how things are run. So that's patriarchy. And yeah, I don't want to spoil everything, but in the Barbie movie, Ken sort of gets red pilled and becomes patriarchal men's rights sort of the character for a little while. Um, Luckily, he doesn't remain that way. Um, but that's funny. So that's androcentrism. So think, Ken's evil turn in his Mojo Dojo Casa House in Barbie. That's androcentrism, right? And we can cite lots of examples of patriarchy, right? Like for a long, long time, most leadership positions anywhere were held by men. I mean, heck, uh, we used to segregate when women could go to school. Women couldn't always go to school, including university. And then when we did start allowing women to go there, sometimes that was at a separate university. So women were segregated, even though they were allowed to pursue an education, they were still segregated from the men. So the experience, I know we're not doing this in person, but the experience that like I had going to university or that you're having now, where you're in a class with men, women, and all kinds of folks, is relatively new, right? It used to be that women were just not allowed to pursue an education. So that's pretty patriarchal, right? So good. I think we all understand the patriarchy. And well, one other thing I'll say about feminism is that it does kind of exist on I guess a spectrum, maybe you could say. Some feminists are concerned with promoting equality between the sexes or the genders, whereas other feminists are more concerned with deconstructing the patriarchy, taking the patriarchy apart and reforming society. Um, so again, like this is there's not really much on feminism in this book. This is it, but I'm really trying not to represent it as a sort of monolithic. Not much on feminism, but I'm trying not to represent it as a sort of monolithic movement because it's really not. Oh. So here's what we call the legend. Hmm. Yeah, Michaela, that's a good point. The number of famous literature that are only written by old white men. And it is interesting how these famous literature pieces are still being taught in the modern day. Yeah, that's right. That's another example. And it's true. Like, this is a question that some feminist thinkers have asked. They ask, I remember I had a philosophy of art class, and I read a paper. I don't remember the author's name, but the paper was entitled "Why Are There No Great Women Artists?" And the answer that the author gives is not that um, there are no good women artists out there. It's just that artistic greatness was defined by men. The great paintings were the ones that men did. It's not as if women couldn't also create beautiful works of art. It's just that the art they created, was perhaps judged unfairly because of this androcentric point of view, right? And it's the same with literature, right? The greats are mostly men, but that's not because um, yeah, that's right. Like when Mary Shelley, who was Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, published Frankenstein, I believe she did so under a male pen name at first. I could be wrong about that though. Um, Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Women were also sexualized for art. Um, and women who wanted to do art, yeah, like Ryan says here, were could be ignored or dismissed. They weren't encouraged, right, to do literature, art, anything like that. So, on to the legend. What is the legend? The legend is kind of like the way that Philip Kitcher sketches um, our common sense understanding of science. So here are some elements of the legend. The scientific production of knowledge is guided by reason, right? Science is a rational enterprise. And it's also an individual enterprise. Um, and sure, you might be saying, well, scientists collaborate on on projects all the time. Yes, they do, but they collaborate as individuals. Individuals are the ones who adopt particular theories or accept or reject particular hypotheses. Individuals, excuse me, are the ones that do experiments. And if there's a scientific consensus, it's always between a group of rational individuals, right? Another important point is that science is supposed to be a foundational enterprise. The knowledge that science generates is foundational in the same way that foundationalism in epistemology says that certain beliefs are foundational, right? Science discovers certain fundamental foundational truths like, I don't know, the laws of physics. And then other theories are based on that, right? Like um, we can reduce biology, for example, to chemistry, and we can reduce chemistry to physics. So physics is foundational, and then chemistry is on top of that, biology, and so on and so forth. And finally, science leads us to objective truths. Scientists are realists, right? When it comes to the theories that they posit, those theories are supposed to tell us something about the way the world really is. And the world really does exist. There's a real mind independent reality out there. And it's science's job to tell us what it's like. Um, so science and reason go hand in hand. Um, Science is supposed to be guided by reason, by rational principles. Scientists are often viewed as reasonable people. And finally, science is also supposed to be value free. Our are not supposed to affect the scientific process. The knowledge generated through science should not be affected by values, by the values that the individual scientists hold. Um, Apologies for yawning so much today. Very sleepy. So this is, again, what Philip Kitcher calls the legend, the sketch of science. And I think it's pretty clear the commitments to reason and objectivity that we find within the sketch. And these are the commitments that feminist philosophers are trying to critique. So let's go on to the next slide here. So why don't we start by critiquing the notion of objectivity, right? There are a couple of dimensions to this notion, one epistemic and one metaphysical. Crumley calls the objective dimension or the epistemic dimension of objectivity the point of view independence or the view from nowhere, right? We all as individuals have our own point of view, right? I have a point of view, you have a point of view. But science isn't supposed to have a point of view. Science should tell us about the world from no one's point of view. I suppose a really simplistic example would be to, scientists don't let their, a zoologist might have a favorite animal. But just because they have a favorite animal, that should not allow them to dictate that shouldn't interfere with their descriptions, their scientific descriptions of that animal or other animals, right? Um, Physicists might have certain favorite I don't know. Maybe they have favorite subatomic particles. I don't know. But that shouldn't inform their theorizing. So science is supposed to give us this view from nowhere, this objective viewpoint, rather than subjective. Like my point of view is a subjective point of view. Your point of view is a subjective point of view. Science is supposed to be objective, right? That's the objectivity. That's the epistemic dimension of the characteristic of objectivity. But the metaphysical characteristic or the metaphysical dimension of objectivity says that science objectively gives us facts about the way the world is. It's bias free because there's nobody's point of view interfering with anything. It gives us a clear picture of reality. But feminist epistemologists disagree here. They criticize this notion of objectivity in two different respects. They point firstly to cases of bad science. There are cases where scientists have been shown to simply not have been objective, right? We can point to real cases of that. So does anyone have any examples that they would like to share that they could possibly think of? Scientists not being objective. And I do have some examples from Crumley that I can bring in. But yeah, Jose, autism and vaccines. Yeah, we discussed this previously, but yeah, this guy, Andrew Wakefield, um, definitely made up a bunch of data um, that indicated that the MMR vaccine caused autism. Now, this is not true. I cannot emphasize this enough. The MMR vaccine does not cause autism, but um, the damage done by Wakefield, I mean, it's been done, right? And the anti-vaccine movement has only grown um, thanks to misinformation that was rampant during the pandemic, right? The CIA during the 1960s is an interesting one. Yeah, they had the MK Ultra program where they were trying to figure out whether they could use psychedelics to to do things like interrogate people. This is a good one, Dylan. The Gatorade health studies that Gatorade paid for. Yeah, making up data. Yeah, that's what Wakefield did. But yeah, like scientists are not always objective. Sometimes scientists have sometimes people sometimes they have conflicts of interest, right? Which affect their objectivity. Like if I'm being paid by Gatorade to say that Gatorade is healthy, that could bias my results, right? I think we can all see why. Yeah, the theory around Bronwyn says the theory on men having big brains, meaning they are smarter. Yeah, that's not really very objective, is it? Because it's looking at absolute brain size, firstly, and not actual cognitive performance. And also, it's not whether your brain is bigger overall, it's the size of brain to body, it's the ratio. And by the way, most women tend to have bigger brains relative to their body sizes. So eugenics definitely not free of bias, definitely not objective. I mean, here the idea was to get rid of certain people that we didn't want around. That sounds pretty biased, not very objective. Likewise with racism in the healthcare system. Lobotomies are, yeah, they're interesting. I don't know if lobotomies are really an example of this. Um, yeah, but yeah, like with Gatorade, Theo says, with sugar, margarine, there are scientists who are not objective because there are people giving them lots and lots of money. Yep, AIDS being heavily stigmatized. This was part of a broader, I mean, I think that medical professionals changed their tune on this faster than society at large did. But regardless, I think you're right. Flat Earth, oh, they're just wrong about everything. Yeah, guys being better at math is another one. Um, Yeah, Dawson, this is a good one. The GMO corn and the butterflies. Um, yeah, the medicalization of like pregnancy and childcare has certainly not been completely objective. Yeah, so yeah, Vicente, that's a really good example. Yep, the IQ test. IQ test, yeah. Well, the problem with IQ tests is predominantly we I think people misunderstand what they actually measure, and they've been misused as well. Not enough time to get into the history of that, but yeah, wolves having an alpha male. Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. And there's even one in the textbook, so I'll that's similar to that. Yeah, no, Becky, that's a good point. That is still something that arguably there's some bias there. There is okay, so a study by Hardy, um, or rather in a paper by Hardy, uh, reading from page 102 of the textbook, studies in primatology mating strategy in recent decades focused only on that of males. As one researcher in the field notes, no one will ever again be permitted to make pronouncements about primate breeding systems after having studied only one sex or after watching only the conspicuous animals. She also remarks that it is by now undeniable that research in the various fields has been male centered. So here we've got male chimpanzees being observed by male scientists, and they're not interested in what the female chimpanzees are doing. So we don't get the entire story because of this sort of androcentrism, right? Um, maybe something similar is going on. Maybe something similar is going on with alpha males, and there's the idea that there's an alpha male. Um, chimpanzees are have dominance hierarchies. Chimpanzees are, you could say, very patriarchal societies. Common chimps, that is. Bonobo chimps are matriarchal. So matriarchy would be the opposite of patriarchy here. And I mean, surprise, bonobo chimps are a lot more peaceful than common chimpanzees. Um, common chimpanzees go to war with like other troops of chimpanzees, for goodness sake. They go out on these patrols and they will kill. If they find, they'll go into another troop's territory, and if they find a male all alone, or if a lone male comes into their territory, they will just kill him, right? Bonobo chimps, although there is some intertroop violence, they are actually much more peaceful. So, yeah, I wouldn't want to be a monkey or an ape. Well, I guess I am an ape, just not a chimpanzee, right? Because chimpanzees are so violent. Um, so anyway, those are some cases of bad science. There are other ones. There's one mentioned here where studies of hormones on brain development, but a lot of these studies only look at male hormones, not female hormones. So we don't have the whole picture, right? What's another one? Another one here. The language used in describing the fertilization of eggs is based on stereotypical descriptions of interactions between men and women, right? So it's an androcentric point of view. Yeah, orangutans seem chill, if you ask me. Um, but it really sucks all the habitat loss that they have to contend with. Another critique of objectivity that some feminist epistemologists offer is just that we can't do purely objective science. Like, sure, sometimes science claims to be objective, and then we find that it's not. So that's kind of a weaker claim. Like, yeah, we can do objective science. It's just that there's a lot of science that is not, in fact, objective. But this is a stronger claim in that it denies the possibility of purely objective science completely. Why? Well, science, it is claimed, reflects the values and beliefs of the researchers doing the science. And those people don't exist in a vacuum. They live in societies that are situated in a historical context. So the values of the researchers reflect upon the social settings of the science. Um, so just going back a slide, where value is supposed to be, science is supposed to be value free. Another important element in this critique of objectivity is that science is certainly not value free. And that's one reason why it's not objective. Yeah, modest, weak. It's similar in the sense that it's not strong. You know, a lot of times in philosophy, you'll hear differences drawn between certain strong and weak claims. Stronger claims are usually claiming more, right? And weaker claims are claiming a little bit less. Well, a lot of these feminist philosophers would say that no, humans cannot be purely objective, right? A Cartesian would say, yes, we can be. We can be purely objective and we can use reason and no problem. The sun is really in the way here. Maybe if I go over here. But yeah, I think that feminist philosophers, especially postmodern feminist philosophers, would say no. There's no way we can be completely objective. It's just not how it works. Yeah, yeah, and like Michaela says, that's a really good point. Michaela says in the chat, you know, sometimes we pick up biases, you know, that we don't intend to, just from the culture that we're situated in or from our upbringing, right? And we might not intend to have a bias, but we might nonetheless have one. And we might not even be aware that we have it, which means we're not objective, right? Yeah. Yeah, Ryan, I agree. Like, it sounds almost too good to be true. Like, oh, science is just this amazing, super objective thing. And it's like, well, if you actually look at the history of science, it's definitely not. Um, you know, that doesn't mean you have to go all the way to like metaphysical social constructivism or something, but it does mean that, you know, science might not be what you think it is. Um, so speaking of social constructivism, the idea here is that the results of science themselves are not objective; they are social constructions. So, just getting to what I mentioned a moment ago, you can be a realist about social constructivism or not, right? Some people, some social constructivists are not realists in that they do not believe there is a mind independent reality. This would be like strong social constructivism. If you're a strong social constructivist, you believe that there is no mind independent reality. Reality is socially constructed. But not all social constructionists endorse this view. I mean, you can see how strong this view is. Like, you know, is everything a social construct? um yeah, well, Frankie, that's right. Like, scientists, like I said a moment ago, scientists could have biases that they're not aware of, so they can't know that they're being objective all the time, right? If they have biases that they're not aware of. So you know, it seems pretty strong to pretty strong claim to deny um a mind independent reality. Like everything is a social construction. And I myself do not go that far. I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I'm not a social constructivist in that sense. So Amran asks, what is objective truth then? Are any of our beliefs objectively true, or should we actually question everything we believe in, as it might go wrong, might be so wrong, right? even if we question our beliefs, then how do we get to objective truth? Well, I mean, those are good questions, but we're kind of prior to that right now, right? In that we're questioning whether there even is an objective truth in the first place. And social constructivists, depending on uh, the degree to which they're committed to it, would deny that there's an objective truth. Um, um, well, it means it depends again. Like I don't want to misrepresent anyone, but the idea is that everything is socially constructed. Um, there isn't any mind independent reality at all. That's the strongest, most extreme version. Yes, that would mean relativism. But I don't want to focus on that because it's a little too out there. Um, so Linda Fagan is a social constructivist, but she's a realist. So sure, there is a mind independent reality out there. But our standards of justification are not purely objective. Our standards of justification arise from particular historical and social settings. Also, she says that theories are underdetermined by evidence. It's values that help us bridge this gap when we're dealing with rival theories, right? And I'll try and spell this out with an example. Okay, so the definition of social constructions would be something it like again, it really depends on the degree of commitment that you have. But if you're like a strong social constructivist, you don't think that there is a mind independent reality. Reality itself is a social construct. But if you're like Linda Fagan, you believe that things like our scientific norms are social constructions, things that people come up with together. I mean, you don't have to be you don't have to not be a realist to be a social constructivist, right? Like, what are some things that are real that are also socially constructed? Maybe we can come up with some examples. We're doing okay for time here. In a way, yeah, I suppose race is a problematic notion. Um, but I mean, it's it's grounded in like really scientific racialism of the 19th century, which was not really very scientific. Nonetheless, a lot of those concepts still stick with us today. So they're real in that sense. Yeah, and stuff with other things that are biased. Gender's a tricky one. Some social constructivists would argue, yes, gender itself is a social construct. Others would argue that gender roles and things like that are social constructs, but gender is real. I myself think I tend towards realism about gender, right? Which is not to say that gender always conforms to sex, right? There are cisgendered folks like me, but there are also transgendered folks, and they're real and deserve to be treated with respect. It's just that it's not, the gender itself isn't a social construct. Um, there may be, biological developmental reasons why I grow up cisgender and straight and someone else identifies as trans, right? um uh so being a realist about gender doesn't mean that gender always aligns with sex, is what I'm trying to say, right? Beauty standards, yeah, beauty standards, absolutely. um Intelligence, maybe. Well, it depends. Like it really depends on how strong your commitment, like how many kinds of things do you think are socially constructed? In a way, identity is socially constructed. Um, Yeah, money is actually the example I was looking for, right? It's nice and straightforward. Like we made up money. Um, money is a social construct. But just because money is a social construct doesn't mean I'm okay with you just taking all of my money, right? So yeah, money is a social construct. Um, yeah, I mean, but you're right. Like, gender is a tricky one, and I think that's probably why Crumley steers sort of clear of it here. But there is a point about like concepts, like gender concepts, like women are, you're not a woman. Here it says one is a woman. This is from Haslinger. One is a woman not by virtue of one's intrinsic features, for example, body type, but by virtue of one's part in a system of social relations, which includes, among other things, men. So gender is a relational or extrinsic property of individuals, and the relations in question are social. So that's like more of a stronger social constructivist view where gender is more about it's constructed, but it's not like somebody made it up. It's rather that it emerges out of our interactions with other people, right? Um, so that's what that means. And again, there's a sort of spectrum of views, and feminists are not monolithic about this. I think that there's room for disagreement, so long as you're not, a bigot about it, right? Um, and I know little about postmodern philosophy, so I'm certainly not an authority on this matter when it comes into social constructivist theory. Anyway, so where were we? So yeah, I was saying how theories are underdetermined by evidence. I had to do a little double take when I was reading this part of the textbook, but it's true. If you have two rival theories, two theories that explain your data equally well, you'll appeal to some norm to try and decide between them, like the principle of parsimony. So, the principle of parsimony is often given as Occam's razor. The simplest answer is the correct one. What that means is you want the theory that you end up picking to have the fewest unwarranted assumptions. Now, that's good. But that's something that I think Fagan would say emerged out of practicing science in certain historical and social settings. So it's a value. It's a value that scientists have. The principle of parsimony. Yeah, some would argue that, like intelligence. Yeah, some people would certainly argue that. Um, so it's these social, historical, cultural values that are at play here. And that's what the critiques of the legend are trying to argue. So Fagan is not really, like I said, she's not really a strong social constructivist. She's not arguing against metaphysical claims of objectivity. So she still thinks there's an objective world out there, a mind independent reality. But our epistemic norms are socially constructed. They're things that people make up, right? Um, this gets a little tricky sometimes when it comes to like values of power structures, and this is where like the radical feminists come in. They want to disassemble those power structures, like disassemble the patriarchy, right? So we already had a good discussion here. What do we think about um forget about, or don't forget, but remember, what we're really talking about here are concepts. So does it make sense to say some concepts are socially constructed? Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. Money is a good one. Um, to one extent or another, arguably things like gender and intelligence also. right? We can see how it makes sense, right? Like being socially constructed doesn't mean we just made it up. I mean, that's an important takeaway that I want you all to understand. It doesn't mean that we just made it up, right? Um, it just means that they are things that we came up with socially. So gender roles, like that's why I chose the example of gender roles. Like gender roles are different in different societies, and they change over time, right? So we can think of them as being socially constructed. Yeah. Yeah, probably there are more things socially constructed than we realize at any rate. And it doesn't mean that they're not real or not important. I mean, laws are constructed, but they're important, right? So that's the takeaway, I guess, is just saying something is a social construct doesn't mean like it's just made up willy-nilly. It means that it's something that emerges out of like our social situations. Where do we draw the line? Well, it probably depends on which concept we're looking at. Because remember, we're talking about concepts here, right? Our ideas, our mental representations of things. So sure, there are aspects of reality out there, but we also have concepts of those aspects of reality. So um oh, my battery's running out. I'm going to plug my computer in. One moment, please. Um, yeah, beauty standards and gender roles, I think, are really good examples of things that are socially constructed. And the fact that they differ between cultures, I think evidences that, right? Like for example, okay, so a beauty standard in present day culture. This again, it's not exactly black and white, but socially, it's kind of expected here in the 21st century that for the most part, women wear makeup and men don't, right? Of course, there are exceptions to that. Like there are some men who wear a bit of makeup. There are some women who don't like to wear makeup, but those are the sort of stereotypical expectations, right? Is that women wear makeup and men don't. Um, but if you go back a few hundred years ago, um, men wore an awful lot of makeup. Um, Pictures of people in uh like think of like not ancient but like aristocrats from think of somebody like King Louis the 14th or something. He would have worn a heck of a lot of makeup, right? um and women at certain periods in history like the Victorian era were discouraged from wearing makeup, at least most women. Why? Because if you wore makeup, people would think that you might be a sex worker, right? So these things have changed. Beauty standards change, right? Yeah, that's right. In Shakespeare's day, women weren't allowed to act in plays because women weren't really allowed to work in general. So the women were played by men. This might be the origin of the term drag queen or being in drag. We don't know for certain, but it may come from an old note in the margin, dressed as a girl, drag. We don't know that for certain. It could be apocryphal, but it's possible. And it's certainly true that back then women weren't allowed to act. So women would be portrayed by male actors. Um, yeah, that's true. Because back in the day, nowadays, again, changing beauty standards. Nowadays, the sort of stereotypical alpha male is, has a big chest with big muscles and, a six pack and abs. Back then, it was the calves and the ankles actually, and that's why men would wear heels. Um, so yeah, it's true. Like these things change. Um, so Amran has a comment. Then you can't impose your values on other societies as long as their social construction is different. Um, well, I mean, this is kind of, I mean, sure, but universal rights. I mean, these rights are there to ideally, in an ideal world, are there to make sure that everyone can be who they want to be, right? Um, that's what I would say to that. Like, I mean, does anyone not want to have the kind of rights that are enshrined in, um, the UN Declaration on Human Rights? I mean, it protects people that are vulnerable. That's what it really does. Um, so a lot of Casey says a lot of social contracts come from a place of trying to create structure, but these structures are like roads. Some constructs make sense and expand in a well-organized way, and other social constructs web out like a city that's expanded too quickly and get messy. Then we try to change these constructs by adding new roads, but these roads, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. It's complicated. I mean, I think we agree on the fact that it's complicated. Yeah. Yeah. Like Jose says, human rights are a social construct. If you're a social constructivist about human rights, you believe that they are not like, they're not like natural rights, like ordained by God or something. You believe that they're things that we make up, and we do it because it makes our lives better, right? Um, well, Amran, I'm not really sure I'm following what you're saying, to be honest. Like, I mean, should we, like, what's a what is like, yeah, I'm just not following you. Well, I think most humans would tell you that the kinds of human rights that are enshrined in the Declaration on Human Rights, like, you have a right to, say, freedom of expression, to security of the person, to freedom to decide what you believe, scientifically, religiously, like what the, I mean, rational people would agree that those are good things to have, right? What's the problem? We are subjects. I mean, we are subjects ourselves. Um, that's fine. You can disagree. I'm just saying that, like, look, we want objectivity, fine. But that's part of this critique of philosophy and science is just like we want objectivity. We might not get it though. And it may turn out that science and philosophy don't even work that way. Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I mean, the UN, has member states which vote, and the governments of those member states are also elected democratically. So it's like people have a say, right? Yeah, I mean, there's a worry about relativism, but um, like I'm not sure what to do about that. I don't want to be a relativist, mind you, but that doesn't mean I don't think that we can socially construct some rights for ourselves that protect people and enshrine certain freedoms and so forth. Well, in what ways is the subjective truth going to be different from, like, like who disagrees with, you know, human rights? And would you want to live in a society run by the people that don't agree that people have those rights? Do you know what I mean? So we better move on before we run out of time. No, not necessarily. No, but because I'm asking what you would do. Hmm. Um, Veronica, I'm not sure. Um, I mean, religion, I would say religion is arguably a social construct, depending on who you ask. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. So we could say that human rights might be conventional. Doesn't mean they're perfectly objective, but I mean they're about what how we want to be treated, right? It could be. Faith could be a social construct in the sense that objectivity might be. Maybe faith is as well. Hmm. So, okay, good conversation, but I just want to make sure that we get the final point across. Um, on social constructivism, to some extent or another, the objects and properties in the world depend in some way on our own concepts. So, in some sense or another, the world is constructed by us. Um, So any concept that maybe is constructed and depends on us and our concepts is socially constructed. Again, this is not a monolithic school of thought. Like one person's social construction is another person's objective thing that exists, right? This is a way of understanding what our concepts are. So let's talk about reason real quick, because we are running out of time. So many people agree that humans have reason. It's a capacity we all share as human beings. And again, feminist philosophers don't have a single theory on how reason relates to gender, but a lot of them do agree on the idea that reason has been used to support androcentric views. So reason is what we could think of as a gendered concept. So, for example, Genevieve Lloyd argues that reliance on reason in the Western philosophical tradition is androcentric. So there's a masculine bias when it comes to what reason is, how we understand reason, right? Like Rene Descartes associates reason with this incorporeal, disembodied mind that's not really affected by the body's passions, what we would today call emotions or biological drives. And we can see I think we can clearly see how this is androcentric, right? I mean, it gets to the old gender bias that men are rational and women are emotional, right? Which is probably not true. I mean, sure, men are rational, but they're also emotional. And likewise with women, women are both rational and emotional. We're human beings, for goodness sake. Like we all have emotions. Um, and also you got to think of the historical context that Descartes is situated in. Women had very few rights compared to men. Women couldn't vote, couldn't own property, couldn't participate fully in society. They were expected to be mothers, caregivers, and if you were wealthy, you could participate a little bit. Um, but only because you were wealthy, right? Otherwise, you could, if you were a woman in Descartes' age, forget about getting an education unless you were a member of the aristocracy. It wouldn't have happened. Yeah, this is a great point. Most wars, if not all, have been started by men. So you're right. So that's pretty good evidence that men are not very rational. Another example that comes to mind is not during the most recent American election, but the one before, when Hillary Clinton was running against Donald Trump. And a lot of the criticisms of Clinton boiled down to this really awful bias, kind of, misogyny, that this idea that that I think came more from the right wingers, that women were too emotional to be in positions of power, um, which is insane. Look at Trump. He is irrational and emotional, and he's arguably gotten worse over time, right? Um, so yeah, no. Given the choice between those two, I know Hillary Clinton is not perfect, but absolutely the more rational of the two. So yeah. Um, and like Ryan says, yeah, maybe us men are good at rationalizing irrationality, right? And of course, part of this bias could be that we, men, think, oh, I'm so reasonable, I'm not emotional. That doesn't mean we don't have emotions. It means that we just don't deal with them or express them. And arguably, this is not good for us, right? Well, stoicism is not supposed to be that way. Stoicism means you're supposed to just suspend your judgment about things that you can't control. It doesn't mean you're supposed to be like emotion free, right? It just means like, look, am I going to get all bent out of shape about what this ignorant person did to me? No, because they were just being ignorant, right? Yeah, stoicism has kind of been co-opted by like tech bros and like people on the internet who don't actually know about philosophy. So that's probably where that comes from. But yeah, you're right. Catherine the Great, Isabella, yeah, Queen started a lot of wars. Ooh, Cleopatra. Can't forget about Cleopatra. Well, arguably that was Caesar. Um, but yeah, Cleopatra leaves. Julius Caesar runs off with Mark Antony. Big old war happens. Um, so it's not to say that it can't happen, but yeah, we certainly, I would say, although it's not as if queens never started wars. Elizabeth the First fought the Spanish. So there's another example. But it's not to say that women never started wars. It's just that probably, arguably, a lot of wars were started by men, right? Anyway, the point is, I think we can all agree that this sort of dichotomy, um, men are rational and women emotional, is a bad one. Haslanger says the same thing. Traditionally, this is how women have been viewed, as being guided by emotion as opposed to reason, which suggests that that reason is a gendered construct or concept. Um, Margaret Atherton thinks reason is gendered, but she kind of flips it around. She says that Descartes' view of rationality actually shaped our view of masculinity. It was not shaped by it, but it helped shaped our view. So it's not like Descartes thinking, oh, reason, rationality, blah, 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 because I'm a man. It's more like he lays out what rationality is, and then that gets kind of like subsumed into the gender part of the concept of gender when it comes to men, right? So there's some disagreement about the details. but the core idea remains. Reason is a gendered concept. So we're getting close to the end. So we've had a good bit of discussion today. I'm happy about that. So thanks, everyone. I just want to leave you with two alternate conceptions of epistemology. The last section of this chapter, and that's feminist standpoint epistemology and feminist naturalized epistemology. On standpoint epistemology, knowledge is really the outcome of a social process, and that means that knowledge is a social product. Cheers. So knowledge is social, so this kind of undermines objectivity. Moreover, we should privilege the perspective and understanding of women. Excuse me. Because their viewpoint has kind of been neglected throughout the history of science. And while science may never be value-free, we should still work to be less biased. We should try and be as least biased as we can be. And then there's feminist naturalized epistemology. This combines Quine's naturalized epistemology with some of the feminist critiques that we've looked at today. It's similar to standpoint theory in that our inquiries, our scientific inquiries, are always situated in a social and historical context. From there, we can determine the real causes of our scientific hypotheses and theories. And like naturalized epistemology, it treats epistemology not as prior to the sciences, but as an extension of the sciences, if you like. So that's all I have for today. Now, next week, just an important reminder, we only have one class because Monday is the Thanksgiving holiday. Oh, the sun is so bright and my curtains don't close. What we're going to do, like I mentioned last time, is talk about the essay assignment. And I realize it's a ways away, but I want to make sure that everybody is in good shape for writing the essay. So, wow, so sleepy. I will deliver instructions on how to write a good essay, and I will give you some suggested topics. I'll also provide a rubric for the essay. It won't be mine. It'll be a really good rubric that I found online. I will cite it properly though. But I found some rubrics that you can use that will give you a pretty good idea of how your paper will be evaluated. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our approach to evaluating your papers when I deliver the instructions for your essay. And of course, the first quiz will open next week too. You'll have all week to start it. Once you begin, though, there will be a time limit, probably 90 minutes, as I said last time. And you'll have to complete it by October 13th at 11:59 p.m., which means, don't start it at 11:30 on October 13th, because you might not finish it, right? Start it and give yourself enough time to finish. So metaphysical is like the study of reality, what exists and what is it like. That's metaphysical. The quiz will be on Brightspace. It's not necessarily a reality outside of human perception, but it can be, right? So metaphysical questions would be like, do we have free will? Does God exist? Do we perceive the world the way it really is, or some representation of the world, right? These are metaphysical questions. So most of this I've already covered. You need to do chapters 1 to 4. So everything we've covered up till today, it is open book. How many questions? We'll say 20 to 25 multiple choice and true false, and probably 5 or so short answer. There's no pre-quiz, no. But there will be detailed instructions. And it'll probably open up Monday night. Monday's still a holiday, so don't feel like you have to start it on Monday night, but I'll have it ready to go, and then you can start writing it from Tuesday all the way through Friday. Okay, so I hope that answers your questions. Thanks everyone for the discussion. It was very lively today. I'm always happy to see that, and the sun is really shining here. I can't seem to block it out. Well, time to go. So I hope you all have a good long weekend. I will post this lecture shortly. Um, and 30 questions total, 3 minutes. Yeah. I mean, it won't take you 3 minutes per question, but yeah, thanks everyone. Have a good weekend. Happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating. If you're going home, safe travels. If you're staying here, I hope you get to spend some time with maybe some of your new friends and fellow students. Okay, bye for now, everyone, and I will see you next Wednesday.